Section 15 of Hearth and Home, Collected Poems and Stories by Various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jack Doldrum by Norman Courtney. How many years it is since I made John Doldrum's acquaintance, I am not going to say, but we were boys together, schoolmates and bedfellows. We used to call him Dolly, and a happier, merrier, lighter-hearted child you would scarcely wish to see. He was quite a favorite with the boys, and among the women in the kitchen he was allowed to do pretty much as he liked. How he ever learned his lessons used to puzzle me, for I don't recollect ever seeing him regularly sit down to study, but notwithstanding his seeming idleness, he was generally at the head of his class. In all sorts of mischief and bedevilry Dolly was foremost, and of any kind of fun or frolic, from robbing an orchard or overturning an old woman's apple stall, to breaking a window or fastening one street door knocker to another and alarming the whole street at midnight, he was never known to give a denial. In fact, for a lad of his size, for Dolly was but a diminutive urchin, there never was a noisier or a prettier fellow. When I left school for college, Dolly was just the same gay, light-hearted lad as ever, and during the next few years we seldom heard of each other and never met. There are few friendships so soon forgotten as those formed at school, and, but for the merest accident, I dare say Dolly and I would have remained strangers altogether. I had been about 3 years at Brasenose, and had just taken my first degree, when business or pleasure, I forget which, a little of both perhaps, drew me up to London. When coming out of the theatre one night, it was during the Kemble dynasty, I was attracted by a noisy altercation between some young fellows and a cabman. I lingered to listen, and in the voice of the youngest of the party, I thought I recognized a familiar sound. I drew near, and there, in the very heat and bustle of the fray, was my quondam friend, Jack Doldrum. The recognition was instantaneous. "What, Dolly?" I exclaimed. "Tom, my boy," said he, and in another moment I found myself taking serious part in the wordy dispute with the cabman. Explanations quickly ensued, and rescuing my friend from the mob that was fast gathering, I walked away with him arm in arm. I found him just the same as ever, just the same light-hearted, careless fellow, with something of the dandy added to his small but graceful figure, and as we trod the almost deserted streets of the quarter to which we had bent our steps, we severally imparted our little histories. Dolly, I soon discovered, had come to London to study, and had entered himself a student of the Temple. But pleasure had too many temptations for his rather superficial nature, and he was fast relapsing into the by no means enviable character of a man about town. Before we had arrived at my lodgings, a new phase of my companion's character had revealed itself to me, and I discovered, with no small degree of pain, that my old schoolfellow stood a very good chance of soon squandering his small patrimony. To engaging manners and the most gentlemanly address, poor Dolly united the most childlike simplicity, amounting almost to gullibility, so that I feared for his future career. He had, I was not long in finding out, the reputation of being a good-natured, witty fellow, and beside being open to flattery to an extent hardly credible, he was so extremely credulous that he seemed scarcely capable of believing in the existence of such things as selfishness or cupidity in all the wide world of London. That night we supped and smoked together, and chatted over our sober cup of the happy school days passed away, and the anticipations of happier days yet in store. And as we sat together, I marked the eager, sanguine face of Dolly, I still called him by his old familiar name, and the thought of how much he must yet certainly endure, and how little his spirit was fitted for the rough encounter with the world, brought a shade of sadness across my thoughts, that I could not, for the life of me, dispel. It was morning before we sought repose, for the memories of old days so beguiled us that we took no heed of time. And what with telling old stories, singing old songs, and comparing notes of old loves and new friendships, the hours slipped unheeded by. We parted. It matters not to tell of my own success. Suffice it that I was successful, and in pursuit of my profession, all thought of my gay-hearted old friend had almost passed from my recollection. I did hear of him occasionally, though, and in rather an unpleasant manner, for certain dishonored bills of exchange, with his name as acceptor, were once or twice the subject of actions in the courts, though as I was never personally engaged in either of them, I took little heed of the circumstance. And once, being with a party at Blackwall, at the conclusion of a successful suit, I met him in the center of a noisy circle of young bucks, all life and gaiety. He was too busy to stop with me more than a few minutes, but in that little time he told me he had cut the law and was living like a gentleman. I had my eye upon the party, for they dined in the same room with us, though at a considerable distance, and as every now and then their uproarious mirth reached our table, I felt that each fresh burst of laughter was at the expense of my friend Dolly, though he, poor simple soul, never suspected it for a moment. At parting, I contrived to lead him to a window, and there, under cover of gazing out upon the moonlit water, I whispered in his ear, "Whatever you lend your friends, Dolly, don't lend them your name to a bill." He squeezed my hand in a grateful manner, and as I left the room, the ringing laughter of the party at a fresh sally of wit from Dolly greeted my ears. Years passed away, more years than the mother of my children cares to count, when I was one day led by business into the debtors' prison of the Fleet, and there, among the racket players, dressed in a faded hunting coat, and with a great moustache and 4 days' beard, was Jack Doldrum, with the semblance of his old gaiety still apparent. I knew him in a minute, but as I turned to where he stood, he slunk away, evidently unwilling to acknowledge the acquaintance. I was extremely grieved at the discovery, and upon inquiry among my friends, I found that Jack had been 6 years in prison at the suit of a Jew bill discounter, who at that moment held his dishonored acceptances to the amount of several £1,000s. What could I do? I visited the prison again and again, but as Dolly would not recognize me, I did not like to force myself upon him, and so I was unwillingly obliged to let him take his own course. One evening, in the depth of winter, I was sitting alone in my office in the city. The course of a heavy suit in Chancery had detained me longer than was my wont. My clerk had left, and I sat poring over a long, uninteresting brief by the light of the office lamp, when a loud, single rap at the outer door of my chambers startled me from my study. I rose and opened the door, when a cadaverous-looking man presented himself, and put into my hand a bit of paper, upon which was scrawled in pencil, "Come to me, dear Tom. I think I'm dying. J.D." I glanced at the messenger. "You come from Mr. Doldrum?" said I. "Yes, sir," said the man. "For God's sake, make haste. The gates close at 10, and I don't think he'll live till morning." "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "Poor Dolly!" You may be sure I was not long in making my toilet. So soon as we got down into the street, I sent the man for a cab and rang at the door of an eminent surgeon, and taking him with me in the vehicle, made the best of my way to the Fleet. The messenger did not ride with us, but taking to his heels, was soon out of sight, and when we arrived at the outer gate, we found the cadaverous man arrived before us. Hurriedly passing into the prison, we followed our guide through the yard into the building itself, where, in the very topmost room of one of the poorest wards, we found my old friend Dolly. I think I shall never forget the sight that met my eyes. Although I went at once to the bedside of the patient, my hasty glance took in every article in the barely furnished room. It was a poor, miserable apartment, with whitewashed walls, around which were hung some engravings of the wretchedest description. In one corner, and occupying nearly half of the scanty space, was a low pallet bed, on which lay poor Jack, while upon a little table was placed a few vials, an old Bible, a dice box, and a pack of cards, the latter of which articles the cadaverous man hastily took up and thrust into his pocket. My eyes sought the bed, and there, writhing in agony and worn almost to a shadow, lay the remnant of the once gay and careless Dolly. The tears started to my eyes as I gazed, and taking his thin, wasted hand within my own, I bent over his face, on which the hot, scalding drops fell down like rain. He had been slumbering, but now he woke, and opening his eyes, wild with fever, he gave me a look I shall never forget, and uttered a cry of pain that seemed to shake the room. The surgeon came and took the other hand. "I fear it is too late," said he. "Nothing but immediate removal can save him. Fever and want have been too much for his weak frame." I was about to rush from the room to seek the governor, when poor Jack lifted himself up in the bed with a violent effort, seized my hand convulsively, and pressing it to his lips, essayed to speak. "Speak to him, sir. He's quite sensible now," said the attendant. "Dolly," said I through my tears. "Poor Dolly!" I could say no more, for just at that moment he dashed my hand aside, and uttering a wild cry, fell down again upon the pillow. We bent over him and listened to his quick breathing. Suddenly all was still, and the ticking of the watch in my pocket seemed, to my fancy, like the beating of a strong heart in agony. A moment more, and the surgeon, bending over his face, exclaimed, "The laws which brought him here have given him his discharge at last." Subsequently, inquiry led me to believe that he had written the note to me some days previously, but that he had exacted a promise from his poor attendant not to deliver it till he should be no longer able to direct his movements. The man was too faithful to his word. In a quiet corner of a country churchyard, within sound of the old school bell, and shaded by the leaves of a weeping ash, there is a little grave. A wooden tablet is at the head of the grass-grown mound, and upon it are inscribed 2 words, "Poor Dolly." End of section 15, read by Elsie Selwyn.